Spider-Man, Spider-Man, does whatever a spider can. Spins a web any size, catches thieves just like flies. Look out, here comes the Spider-Man.
Ever since I was young, Spider-Man has been my favorite superhero. He was the everybody superhero. Anyone could be Spider-Man. The nerdy kid, bit by a spider, saving the city, yet still having to remember to complete his homework on time. He was different to every other superhero out there, and this is what is integral to his character. In 2009, Rocksteady released Batman Arkham Asylum, and it was the first superhero game to truly succeed. Sure, Spider-Man 2 was a great Spider-Man game, but Arkham Asylum was simply just a great game. The same way The Dark Knight or Logan are just great movies before great superhero movies. This is something that was so greatly achieved by the guys over at Rocksteady. The entire time playing it, however, I couldn't help but imagine, what if somebody did this for Spider-Man? After plenty of dogshit Spider-Man games, we're brought to 2018, where Spider-Man PS4 is on the horizon and seems to be the Arkham of Spider-Man without being Spider-Man Arkham Asylum. The game is still a ways off yet, and I thought I'd take this time to make a video looking at exactly what Insomniac needs to do and needs to avoid in order to succeed in making a Spider-Man game, in my opinion. Something which the Arkham games did incredibly well over their tenure was establish a world that was unique. I never felt that I was just seeing stories and scenes from movies or comics. The source material, of course, was respected, and the characters were based on how they were meant to be, without being purely copied. They made the Batman lore their own and created something which was entirely its own thing. They didn't decide they wanted Batman to do one thing he did one time in a comic and then do something else because he did that in a movie. They took the fundamentals of what makes Batman Batman and stripped it down and built it back up in order to create their own character. They did this with every single aspect of the source material. They didn't just take a character and bring it to life, they broke it down and molded it into something brand new. Spider-Man needs to do the same. You can't just take Ultimate Spider-Man or Spider-Man 2099 and use that as your template. To succeed, you need to take different aspects of Spider-Man and his lore and break down the individual aspects and rebuild them in your own image to craft something truly unique and memorable. I want to remember these games for doing Spider-Man in a new way, not because they showed us Ultimate Spider-Man or any of the Spider-Man universes in video game format. It seems Insomniac has done their research. Each person involved seems to have read up on plenty of Spider-Man stories and have been passionate about this character since being children. And this is what gives me hope that they'll easily get this part down. They've already shown us that this is an older Peter Parker to what we're normally used to seeing in mainstream media, and his suit is clearly very unique, so I have high hopes that they can make a unique Spidey world that can live on its own merits and create something new to add to my favorite hero. Whilst on the topic of world building, we need to make sure New York isn't just a backdrop for Spidey to do things and have his story. The city and its people are integral to Spider-Man as a character. We need to care about its people, and if there's a random event, we want to go and help those people. Not because we think Spider-Man would do so, but because we want to. We care about these people. That's incredibly important to this game. Another part of building this world is getting Spider-Man's enemies correct. Take a look at Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery. Vulture, Green Goblin, Doc Ock, Scorpion, Shocker, Mr. Negative, Black Cat, Kingpin, Lizard, Electro, Venom, Kraven, Sandman, Mysterio. You get the point. Spider-Man, in my opinion, has the greatest Rogues Gallery of any superhero. Up there with someone like Batman, which is what makes him perfect for a video game. I'm not saying you need to do all of these villains because there are a lot and some are ripe for sequel material as the main villain. Venom, for example, would be a perfect story to tell in a sequel. There is so much material there and conflict for the player to experience as Peter narrative-wise. But there needs to be plenty of villains. We can't just have the one, that's too simple. Spider-Man has many villains, and at his age in this game, he's had some experience with them. It's perfect for them to include plenty of these iconic villains as side storylines, very similar to Batman Arkham Knight, which did side stories with iconic Batman villains perfectly. With a world that has lore as rich as Spider-Man, they need to make sure they're building it in a unique and memorable way, making each little thing their own, so we remember this as an iconic and new Spider-Man world that we deeply care about and lose ourselves in. A recent issue which has befallen the DC Extended Universe movies is the fact that each movie is dark and gritty as if it were a Batman movie. Having this style worked well for the Dark Knight movies, but they don't work well for Superman or Wonder Woman. They aren't dark and gritty characters. Superman is vibrant and bright, but in trying to pedal off the back of the Dark Knight's success, they got lost. In trying to compete and follow in the success of the Batman Arkham games, Insomniac need to be cautious of this exact thing. Spider-Man isn't dark and gritty on the whole, and what made the Arkham game successful tone-wise will not have the same effect on Spider-Man. There are structural elements, gameplay elements, and writing techniques they for sure need to take inspiration from, but just doing Batman Arkham for Spider-Man simply does not work. In 2014, we got The Amazing Spider-Man 2, the video game, and it was said that this was going to follow a lot of what the Arkham games did. However, this didn't work for Spider-Man. The levels were linear and stealthy with a cheap version of the Arkham combat, and it just felt clunky and slow, very unlike Spider-Man. With this failure serving as a clear lesson to Spider-Man games, you'd think they won't fall into this trap, but with the people shouting they want a Spider-Man game like Arkham City, without really knowing what they're requesting, it wouldn't be too hard to accidentally implement the wrong elements into your game, thinking you were doing the right thing, which is exactly what The Amazing Spider-Man 2 did, and it was atrocious. Spider-Man isn't just Spider-Man. An integral part of Spidey is that of Peter Parker. Peter isn't a billionaire genius, at least not yet, and as much as Spider-Man has many problems saving the city, villains always trying to defeat him, fending off flirty cats.
You do like fun, don't you?
You're right. I could use a little more fun in my life.
Peter had many huge problems too, which to an average superhero are trivial, but to Spider-Man as a young man are huge. Peter has to contend with his family life, protecting his aunt and keeping her safe, his friends, his significant other, and spending time with all of them, along with his work at the Daily Bugle and his schoolwork, whether that be high school or college, not to mention keeping up with his rent or even his laundry. Spider-Man has all the problems of a young man whilst also having to contend with being Spider-Man. He can't do one or the other, he has to do both. This feeling that Peter gets needs to translate over to the players. You need to feel torn, maybe even give you choices and allow those choices to have story consequences. How would the player balance those things Peter has to contend with? This is a huge part of writing a good Spider-Man story, maybe even the most important element. If they can't get this down, then everything else isn't even worth getting right because they've already failed. You probably think I'm being harsh, but can you distinctly remember any Spider-Man game that's ever gotten this right? There's been decent Spider-Man games like Spider-Man 2 and Web of Shadows, however, they excel in making you feel like Spider-Man, as if Spider-Man was the only thing there was to contend with. It makes Peter and Spider-Man feel isolated and separate, making his life far more manageable, which is a lot easier to write, especially for a video game, but they can't cut corners with this one. If you want to make a good Spider-Man game, you need to get the gameplay mechanics right, make the swinging feel good, and the combat too. But to make a good Spider-Man story, the duality and relatability that makes Spider-Man so iconic to every comic book reader, to every movie viewer, and to every webhead fan across the globe needs to be front and center to the narrative of Spider-Man. From what we've seen from interviews and conferences, the guys at Insomniac are hardcore Spider-Man fans. They know what works and what doesn't. They know Spider-Man inside and out, and I have complete faith they'll nail everything I talked about in this video. But I thought regardless, it was worth bringing up as a talking point nonetheless. If you enjoyed, don't forget to drop a like, as it would be greatly appreciated. Subscribe for more videos like this one and plenty more already on my channel. Don't forget to check them out. If you have any requests for future topics, as always, leave them below. And don't forget to check out my Patreon at patreon.com/AsAlways for extra and exclusive content that you may be interested in for just $1 a month. Thanks so much for your support, and I'll see you later on.
Spider-Man.